to Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute, and he previously served as senior counsel to the U.S. House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Great to have you on The Context today. And I want to start with that point there. Is this making a big deal out of something that in the end didn't end up having serious consequences when it comes to those strikes on Houthis and U.S. military personnel being in a harm's way?
Well, look, it didn't have an immediate impact, but I think the issue is a big one, right? This is a problematic situation. The idea that somehow these are lies, these aren't lies. We know what happened. We know that signal is being used for these conversations. That's a good tool to use if you're going to use something that's publicly available. It's an encrypted, end-to-end encrypted system. At the same time, that's not the normal course of behavior. So you've got to say, hey, is this the right thing for the government to be doing? If it is because they need to have good communications, at a moment's notice, they can't get to a secure compartment information facility, that's fine. But then the president ought to approve it. There ought to be a process. And perhaps we ought to be giving our senior leaders the capabilities to do this kind of communication with the appropriate classifications and clearances on their devices. That didn't happen here.
Yeah, if I could just follow up on that point there that you made, is it time to start discussing more modern ways of communicating about some of these intelligence matters when, as you said, it's not always possible for principals like the ones in this chat to get to that secure location?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, look, the reality is when you impose significant security restrictions on anything, whether it's cybersecurity or classification, you end up having people use workarounds. Back in the old days, people used to get on phones and, talk around classified by saying, think about that TB thing we talked about yesterday, right? Referring to the initials of a program. This is essentially what's happening here, but it's happening because we expect a certain rate and speed of communications amongst our senior leaders and other folks as well. And so we've got to provide them the capabilities so we don't end up with these workarounds that end up being worse, and you end up adding by mistake, kind of in a comic way, a significant journalist who ends up reporting on it.
And Jamil, if we look back at that tweet, that comment on X that Stephen Chung, the White House communications director, made, there was a lot of deflection there, wasn't there? It wasn't addressing the immediate questions, the most pertinent questions about what had happened. So do you think this administration has really taken responsibility for what's happened in a full enough way?
Well, look, I mean, we all know what happened. They admitted, in fact, that these were legitimate texts and the like. What you now see, though, on Capitol Hill, you saw today with Tulsi Gabbard going up there, and when asked by Senator Warner whether there was classified information, she just said, I'm not going to get into that. We all know what was going on there. The reality is they would be better placed to say, look, we had an exigent circumstance. We needed to communicate. We were authorized to do so by the president, or the principals decided this was the right way to do it. And, that's our choice. That's the decision we made. You can disagree with it, but this is how we decided to go forward. That's not what they did. Instead, they're saying, well, these are lies. This is not a credible journalist. But of course, nobody's denying the actual reporting. To the contrary, they've affirmed it. So now just lean into that. They haven't done that, and I think that's a mistake.
If this was a Democrat conversation that was going on about some sort of national security matter, though, the response would be entirely different, wouldn't it? So, do you think double standards are being applied here?
Well, look, it's all about, they say you stand where you sit. And the truth is that when you're out of office, it's easy to criticize those that are in. When you're in, you got to get the job done, and you give yourself leeway to do that. Now, I will say there's a difference between what happened with Hillary Clinton, which was the sort of parallel situation. She set up a private server knowing this was intentionally a way to get around this. They set up a Signal chat, right? Signal definitely more secure than a private server. This is a specific small group, designed to be a small group. That was a much larger group. There they put labeled classified information. So there are distinctions. But they start to collapse when you run away from it and try to deny what happened. Better to turn into say, this is fundamentally different. Here's why we thought this was appropriate. And we had sign off to do it. But that hasn't been the move. And I think that's what, they often say it's the cover up is worse than the crime. In this case, there was no crime. There's no criminal activity. There's no espionage going on here. Somebody, put the wrong person in the chat. That's inadvertent. That's a problem. But this shouldn't have been happening in the first place. And you got to solve that problem now first and figure out how to get that right.
OK, Jamil Jaffer from the National Security Institute. Good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.